Your heart stops. Within seconds, the room believes you are gone. The monitor is flat. A nurse is pressing down on your chest. A machine says, shock the patient. But then your heart starts again. And after you recover, you describe the room from above. You remember the machine's voice. You describe a man in blue scrubs, even though you had never met him. And the medical record confirms that he was there. Researchers estimated that this experience may have continued for several minutes after the cardiac arrest began. So either your brain created a clear memory when it should barely have been functioning, or dying is not the instant black screen we imagine. And the stranger part begins before the heart even stops. First, one important line. Cardiac arrest is not the same as brain death. During cardiac arrest, the heart stops pumping blood, but doctors may still restart it. Brain death means the complete and permanent end of all brain function. Nobody returns from that. So this video cannot tell you what happens after irreversible death. No survivor can. What we can investigate is the border, the period when the heart has stopped, the person cannot respond, and medicine is still fighting to bring them back. But before that border, something unusual often appears in sleep. Hospice patients approaching death sometimes begin having extremely vivid dreams. Not random dreams about missing a bus or showing up to school without pants. These dreams often involve travel, packing for a journey, entering another place, or meeting someone who died years earlier. A parent, a husband, a childhood friend. The people in these dreams do not usually arrive like monsters. They sit beside the patient. They wait. They reassure them. In one longitudinal hospice study, these dreams and visions were common, felt intensely real, and often provided comfort as death approached. That does not prove dead relatives are actually visiting. The brain could be pulling forward the people most closely connected with safety, memory, and home. But either way, the mind does not always become emptier as the body weakens. Sometimes it becomes more personal, and occasionally it does something even stranger. A person with severe dementia may spend months unable to recognize their own family. Then, without warning, they seem to return. Their eyes focus. They recognize a daughter. They make a joke. They ask for someone by name. They say goodbye. And hours or days later, they die. Researchers call this paradoxical or terminal lucidity. The reports are real enough to be studied, but the mechanism remains poorly understood because the uncomfortable question is obvious. How does a brain briefly recover an ability that the disease appeared to have destroyed? Then, responsiveness disappears. The person no longer opens their eyes. They stop answering. Their family begins speaking about them as though they are no longer in the room. But the brain may not be completely disconnected. In 2020, researchers played changing patterns of tones to hospice patients. They tested some patients while they could still respond, and again after they became unresponsive, only hours from death. All 5 unresponsive patients showed some neural response to changes in sound. That does not tell us that they understood every sentence. It does not prove they were consciously listening, but it does suggest that parts of the auditory system may keep working after the person has lost every visible way to answer. They cannot speak to you, but your voice may still be reaching them. Then, the heart stops. Normal circulation collapses. The brain begins losing the oxygen and glucose it needs to function. From the outside, this looks like the ending. The patient is motionless. The monitor has flattened. Doctors begin CPR, but CPR does not recreate a normal heartbeat. It produces a weaker artificial circulation, buying time while the team tries to restart the heart. For decades, the assumption was simple. No normal circulation means no meaningful experience. Then, survivors began describing one. The largest modern investigation is called AWARE-2. Researchers followed 567 hospital cardiac arrests. Only 53 people survived. 28 were well enough to complete detailed interviews. And 11 reported memories or perceptions that suggested some form of conscious experience. Some remembered medical activity. Some recalled dreamlike scenes. Others described organized experiences connected with death. Meanwhile, separate EEG recordings during CPR sometimes detected organized brain activity tens of minutes after resuscitation had begun. Not in every patient. Not proof of an afterlife, but enough to destroy the easy assumption that the brain always becomes completely and permanently silent the instant the heart stops. So, what do people actually remember? There is no universal sequence. Some remember nothing. Some report confusion or fear, but recurring elements appear often enough that researchers have created standardized questionnaires to measure them. The emergency becomes distant. Pain disappears or stops mattering. A deep calm replaces panic. Time time behave strangely. Some people hear the medical team. Some feel separated from their body. Some describe darkness. Others report a light, deceased relatives, intense memories, or the feeling of entering somewhere unfamiliar. And a small minority report experiences that are disturbing rather than peaceful. Now, remember the man from the opening? He was one of the survivors in the first AWARE study. He later described hearing the automated defibrillator. He remembered watching the medical team from the corner of the room. He described a particular man in blue scrubs and said the man appeared bald beneath his cap. Medical records confirmed the defibrillator, the people present, and the man's role in the resuscitation. The machine's programmed sequence allowed researchers to estimate that the experience may have extended several minutes into CPR. That does not prove his awareness literally floated near the ceiling. The study could not test that, but it left researchers with something harder to dismiss than a vague dream.
A detailed account connected to events that actually occurred. This is where science enters the room and tries to kill the mystery. It gets 4 attempts. Round 1, oxygen loss. As circulation collapses, vision can narrow. The systems that calculate where your body is located can malfunction. If the brain's visual field closes from the outside inward, a tunnel may appear. If the brain's body map breaks, you may feel as though you were floating somewhere else. That could explain the tunnel. It could explain the light. It could explain the ceiling. Case closed. Almost. Because an explanation for individual pieces is not automatically an explanation for the complete experience. Why do some survivors remember an organized sequence rather than disconnected fragments? Why can the memory remain vivid years later? And why do people sometimes describe details they believe came from the room around them? The oxygen theory may explain part of the show. It does not yet explain the entire performance. Round 2, chemistry. In 2018, researchers gave DMT to 13 healthy volunteers. The participants were safe inside a controlled laboratory, but their experiences scored remarkably high on a standard near-death experience scale. They described altered time, separation from the body, unusual worlds, and encounters that felt real. In other words, a living brain can manufacture many features of dying without actually being close to death. That is a powerful answer, but it creates another problem. The experiment proves that DMT can imitate a near-death experience. It does not prove that a dying human brain releases enough DMT to cause one. That idea is popular. The evidence is not there yet. Round 3, the final surge. In 2023, researchers examined the brain activity of 4 comatose patients after life support was withdrawn. 2 showed bursts of gamma activity and increased connectivity as their conditions deteriorated. Gamma activity is associated with processes such as attention, perception, and memory. So perhaps the entire experience is one final electrical storm.
The brain realizes the power is going out and launches every firework it has left. But 4 patients is an extremely small group. The 2 patients did not survive. Nobody could ask what, if anything, they experienced. Gamma waves are electrical activity. They are not a recording of a tunnel, a grandmother, or a life review. The surge proves that a dying brain can behave unexpectedly. It does not tell us what the unexpected activity feels like. Round 4, the memory forms during recovery. Maybe nothing organized happens while the heart is stopped. Maybe the story is built as circulation returns. The brain restarts under chaotic conditions. It catches fragments of voices, a flash of light, pressure on the chest, old memories, dream imagery. Then it stitches them together into one continuous experience. Because memory is not a security camera. It is an editor. It can move scenes, fill gaps, and create a smooth story from broken material. This explanation could solve the timing problem, but it is difficult to test because a survivor cannot identify the exact second a memory formed. They only know what they remember after waking. So researchers tried hiding visual targets around resuscitation rooms and playing specific sounds during CPR. The idea was simple. If someone truly perceived the room from above, perhaps they could identify an image visible only from the ceiling. So far, these experiments have not produced decisive visual proof. That matters. A powerful story is not the same thing as objective evidence. But failure to prove that awareness left the body does not prove that no experience occurred. It leaves us with 4 explanations. Oxygen loss can reproduce pieces. DMT can imitate much of the experience. Electrical surges may appear near death. Memory reconstruction could alter the timing.
And yet, no single explanation has cleanly closed every part of the case. Maybe that is because the original question is too large. The process may contain nothing that survives into memory. It may contain sound, a dream, a sudden moment of clarity, a peaceful internal world, a terrifying one, or an experience so vivid that the brain stores it with more detail and emotional certainty than an ordinary memory. Research has found that near-death memories can carry unusually rich sensory and emotional characteristics and remain stable over time. None of this proves heaven. None of it proves that a mind can exist without a brain. But the opposite claim is also too confident. We do not yet know exactly when conscious experience ends around cardiac arrest. We do not know whether every remembered scene occurred while circulation was absent, while CPR was restoring partial blood flow, or while the brain was restarting. What we know is that the line is messier than it looks. A monitor can tell doctors that the heart has stopped. It cannot display the patient's final thought. It cannot show whether a familiar voice is still arriving. It cannot tell us whether the darkness feels empty or whether somewhere inside it, the mind is still creating one last experience. So when the outside world disappears, is the mind already gone, or is it the last thing to leave?